What's up guys, in today's video we're going to be looking into how Greco-Roman fortifications evolved from the massive Cyclopean walls of the Mycenaeans to the cleaner stonework of classical Greece, the detailed masonry of the Hellenistic era, and finally the engineered brick and stone systems of the Roman Empire. And we're going to be taking all of that history and turning it into some practical inspiration for your Minecraft builds, as well as a guide to help you capture the look and feel of Greco-Roman fortifications in your own walls and towers for your cities, your fortresses, and so on in your Minecraft builds. So what I'm going to go through here is I'm going to go through three styles from three different periods from the classical period of history. So we've got classical ancient Greek over here, and we've got the Hellenistic period in the middle over here where it's a little bit whiter. So really from 3rd century BC onwards until the conquest of the Roman Empire, which is the sort of stuff that we've got here. So we've got early Roman Empire and then into like the 3rd century Roman Empire as we go further back. So the things start to get a bit more sophisticated, a bit more modular as we go on. So the main differences we tend to see with these, and you can see this in Minecraft, is you have a big material difference and there's a big layering difference as well. So if you look at classical Greek, classical Greek period, civic defense, basically, this was a advancement onwards from Mycenaean, Cyclopean, like massive stone work architecture, defense architecture, which was basically just built with stuff that they found and just defensive bits that they found or defensive locations which have big rocks. Whereas as Greek city-states got richer, they could invest in very rigid, very straight, just very simple as well, civic defense, which often involved big pieces, so big blocks that were then put together with smaller bits, and that made a tall-ish wall, depending on where you were, with just pretty simple square towers, which often they had crenellations or they had a roof on them. I mean, there are some examples of that, but they were much simpler and mostly made of big stones because that's the things that they could find and that's the things that people were skilled at working with. Whereas as you go into the Hellenistic period and the Hellenistic period of Greek architecture is much more widespread, so it becomes more modular. So you start to see smaller bricks and smaller pieces that basically come together to make more sophisticated and more advanced defense systems. So if we talk about in terms of like city defense or fortifications, you've got, again, things would have been taller, you maybe have buttresses on your walls, you have different materials being used that are more advanced and smaller, so they can be more modular. You've got a couple of examples here, so one with like a roof, one with crenellations, whatever. Then the big invention that the Romans had was, or the big thing that they brought to mainstream building, as we're going to call it, and defense building, is the brick. So where we're going to use bricks in, these earlier bits in this thing, we are using them as tiles, whereas here we're actually using them as bricks. So bricks made up a huge part of Roman defensive fortifications and fortified structures. So if you see many of the walls in Rome, or you see some of the remnant walls in some of various Roman ruined cities, like Tim Gad, for example, is a good example, where you see the ruins of these Palmyra, which sadly is quite destroyed now, but the photos that we have of Palmyra before it was destroyed, you can see the fortifications as well. It's much more modular, and the reason why it's much more modular and they use these bricks and smaller pieces is because it's far easier to repair. And these are the sorts of things that we're going to go through in the material palettes and the shapes of these builds. So the first thing I'm going to explain, so when it comes to a classical period wall, or just ancient Greek wall, I'm thinking in terms of very simple materials and just local basic stone materials. So we've got things like polished diorite, we've got quartz bricks, normal diorite, and then we've got this one, the polished granite. And you're just using pieces that look like big stones, smaller stones, and you're mixing them together to make simpler shapes with a little bit of layering, but not too much, so it doesn't look like it's bad. So I've got a little bit of something down here which looks like it's just been painted at the bottom, and they're very simple blocky shapes, which you can see in some of the remnants of like the Athenian walls, the Athenian long wall, and some of like the really old city-state architecture. Now as well, when you look at your towers, your watchtowers, they weren't particularly regularly placed either. Your walls weren't very engineered, so you're going to have something that's very flat. So here I've got something that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks tall, so maybe 6 meters high to 8 meters high. Whereas then as you go into the Hellenistic period, things start to get a bit taller, but for this video I'm just going to keep it the same size. So as you come to this side here, Hellenistic period, so in between the Roman and the ancient classical Greece period, I'm going to be using things like quartz bricks, white terracotta, again the diorite blocks, some stone blocks here, so andesite and stone, and then again we're going to be using something as like the indication for terracotta tiles. So what I like to do is I like to make crenellations with stairs and slabs. I like to do bits of diorite here, so you have just banded layers, but it looks slightly more developed onwards, so it still looks similar to the classical Greek period, but you have different developments, like you have buttresses on your walls, which basically mean that you can just build them taller. So this is a short wall, but in theory you could build this much taller because you've got buttresses on your walls that are just going to hold your walls up. And they're just a little bit more advanced in terms of technology. And the reason why they were made out of these small materials is because if your wall is broken when it's attacked, because it will be attacked, it's easier to fix. Whereas with this one over here, you've got massive stones. It's hugely labor intensive to fix it, and you can see that reflected in the materials that we use here and here as well. Now as we come on to the Roman style, so I've got two examples of things here. So I've got maybe like an early Roman Republic, maybe 1st century BC, 1st century AD style of thing, where it's much smaller, it's less sophisticated, but then you still have like triumphal arches and like an entranceway into your building. So there's a bit of mix and match. I don't know if I can particularly say it's one time period, but the main materials I'm just using things like cobblestone, this tough thing, polished granite bricks, and then you have your whiter blocks like your diorite, your quartz bricks, and then spruce as well is a big thing that I like to use in these. And with Roman walls, the things that is characteristic about them is they're much more layered. So they would have been painted and they would have been made of brick and all these sorts of things, but you can see they're a bit more layered as they go up. So they're kind of like this, but they're a bit more layered. They now have archways, they're more engineered in that sense, and they're a bit more decorative as well, because by this time it was true with the Hellenistic period that they were like these grand feats of civil engineering and civil architecture. But by the time it's the Roman period, the Romans were very much a militaristic society, and their walls and their defences, their fortifications and their massive fortresses were the cornerstone of the Roman Empire. So then as you come to something a bit later, which is more characteristic of maybe 2nd century, 3rd century Roman Empire, you have these huge tall walls with these big buttresses, very, very regular spacing between towers. So here you've got something like a semi-cylindrical gate that comes into the front, and you have your clear layering of different materials with then perhaps arches that are running along the back of your wall. But you can see, the material palette is slightly different with these ones. So when it comes to actually using these ideas and these materials and these different structures that we're thinking of, what are you doing with them? So we've got here an example of a Roman city, just a small Roman city and whatever, but as you can see, there is a very clear, regular rhythm to the towers, the buttresses, and the arches within the fortifications. So, for example, right here, we've got the front gate. You've got two entranceways, or one entrance, one exit. So you've got the left-hand entrance, and then this side here is the exit. Whereas the rest of it, you've got a very clear 3-arch, 2-buttress system to space out your watchtowers. And this is a system where when you design a type of wall or a type of turret or whatever, basically you can think of this in terms of a Roman system to think, okay, how can I make it work regularly? And is it going to work together in this system? Whereas when you think about it in terms of like ancient classical Greek things, you don't have to worry about this so much because it's there's less of a rhythm. There is a rhythm, but it's less regular in comparison to a lot of the Roman stuff, as we can see here. So in this example here, we have a small, semi-historically accurate, I'd say, classical Greek fortification. So what I've done here is I've got some sort of hilltop fortification that I've built, but I've not really tried to keep any regular rhythm as such with the watchtowers and whatever. There's some kind of spacing, rhythm, but in all honesty, it's nothing that's like as complicated and as regular as what I've done with the Roman stuff. So you can see there's a bigger gap here, then there's maybe a much smaller gap over here, or between these two over here. So you can see there's a bit of a difference between them. But the main thing is that it's very flat walls, high walls, made out of perhaps local materials. So as you see here, we've got some of the diorite in this area around in these hills. So that's what it's probably going to be made of. Some of the big rocks, the small rocks, whatever, what you can find. And then that reflects in the walls that are basically protecting this grain/stable treasury store that we have up in this mountainous area over here. So what we have here is we've got much more of like a Hellenistic period style city. So what we've got is we've got slightly different walls. So rather than like what you have with the Roman stuff, you have some sort of regularity with buttresses. You've got some thinner buttresses, some thicker buttresses, but it's a mix between the two. So with the Roman, it being much more modular, and then the Greek being, the classical Greek being much more monolithic with the big stones and the a bit less detail as well, I'd say. This is kind of the mix between the two. So you have ancient Greek, classical Greek features, but then you also have some Roman features, because this is kind of the transition point between the two major civilizations at the time. So you can see you have some sort of logic where you have some sort of regularity here. So you've got small buttress, then larger buttress, small buttress, large buttress, then you have a turret. But in all honesty, it doesn't really follow that rhythm 100%. It breaks up sometimes. The watchtowers are not particularly placed at any particular interval compared to like the Roman structure, for example. As I just go through this forest to try and show you guys. But then oftentimes you see things like, you know, breaks in the rhythm. So you have like a curved feature, which is maybe a little bit less common, perhaps in like a Roman fortified structure. You've got a big arch over here as well. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of a thing where it's like a mix between the two. There's not a particular rhythm, but then there is a little bit of rhythm here and there. It's kind of the mix between the two is what I'd say. So speaking of a mix, you might be asking at this point in the video, well, you know, oftentimes Greek cities were destroyed and sacked by the Romans, and then they built on top of that. And the same with Hellenistic empires often sacked other Hellenistic empires, and they built walls on top of old walls that have been destroyed. So this is where you're going to start mixing things up. So here, I've got an example of something where Hellenistic, Roman and Greek have probably come and built on the same wall. They've destroyed it many times, and you can see the remnants of older walls in the new wall, and then the new wall is something totally different. So here we've got this large plain here, and I've thought, oh, maybe this wall was guarding something else, and when the city was sacked, the wall was knocked down. So you've got maybe a earlier classical Greek thing, and then you've got some Hellenistic influences here as well. And then you've got the clearly layered Roman brick logic that we see here. So as you can see, you've got some areas that very clearly are old, potentially classical Greek period or early or late Mycenaean period walls. It's like here, this is very much something that would look kind of classical Greek period level fortifications. That area of wall has been retained and hasn't been destroyed, but then some areas have been totally destroyed over the years through sieges and whatnot. So that's where they filled it in with a new style of wall that is maybe more advanced. But what they wouldn't have done is they wouldn't have knocked down an entire wall. If the wall's still there, they're going to keep it and they're going to build on top of it because it saves the materials. So as you can see here, maybe this wall has been knocked down over the years when it was under siege, or with an earthquake or whatnot. So the foundations have stayed, and then the Romans have built on top of the ancient Greek wall, and they've now got a new full wall. Now, the last bit of this video is going to talk about the actual details in the walls. So oftentimes you can build a tall wall with lots of different layers, and it will still look a little bit boring, to be honest. So it really depends on how you detail the things as well. So as you can see, I'm going to come over to this Roman wall here. I've added some small decorative elements like buttons over here. I've added banners on the front, so I've got a big hanging banner on the front, and then maybe you've got some pillar elements on the front here in your archway. And then when you come through to your later period walls and your bigger walls, then you have lots of decorative pieces. So you've got maybe like sill details and maybe like statues or something up here. Or you could even have something like a latrine. So like here, I've built a latrine in the wall where soldiers can go to the toilet. So if you come here, you can go down this hatch, you can access most of your wall area, but you can also go to the toilet inside there. So it's little details like that where you can really, you know, you can really go wild with some of the details. I mean, it's like things like adding plants that are growing out of a wall. It can make it look really old. If you want something that looks really new and pristine, obviously just leave it without any plants growing on it. But there's a real trick to adding a little bit of detail into walls and adding bits of elements that might look like they're defenses in them. But it's something that you guys can play around with. I mean, like this one, for example, I've got some sort of Sphinx statue or eagle, whatever the hell, I don't know what this is, statue on the gateway. So as you enter, this is like, you know, the warning to any invaders coming inwards, which they would have had in many ancient Greek and ancient Roman fortifications, because they were trying to scare off the enemy, basically. So there you have it, guys. That's been my quick crash course little guide into ancient Greek and ancient Roman walls. I'm going to be providing the download for the walls that I've shown in this video in the description and on the Patreon, so you guys can download and have a look for yourselves while you're watching the video, but also in your spare time, or if you want to use the designs as well. Really hope you guys have got some ideas from this video. Hope that you can use some of these ideas for some of your builds in the future. Hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.